We want this to be a very celebratory event. We're celebrating culture and heritage and history and libraries and archives and information. So we're very glad that you are here. My name is Allison Maurer. I'm the Scholarly Communication and Copyright Librarian, and I help put these events together. We call them mini cultural festivals, and we really want to showcase what's in the library collection, but also have good fun food and music, and all the music that I was playing today is actually licensed music. So if you're curious about how that works, how copyright works within the land of music and fine arts, you can always reach out to me. I want to acknowledge this moment that we are in and this very wonderful opportunity that we have to celebrate and learn more about Latinidad history in Utah and the everyday experiences of Latine as a kickoff event for Hispanic Heritage Month. We are live streaming this, so hello to those joining virtually. One of our goals at Marriott Library is to inspire the creation of new knowledge and new works of authorship in whatever form and shape they might want to take, from books to exhibitions to journal articles, zines, sculptures, or even music. We strive to build collections that draw on many experiences, histories, and cutting-edge methodologies to ensure that the best works get produced by those living and working on campus and in surrounding areas. We hope today's event will inspire you in that direction. My fellow librarians, you can see them in the audience, and as a moderator, we have pulled many works for you, the most essential from the collection for you to browse and explore after we hear from today's panelists. And we have food from a local Latinx bakery that I'm very excited about. And then I'll turn my music back on once we are to that browsing portion. The music is from local and national Latine artists, all played with permission, of course. The recording of today's event, along with the list of books and the collections, they're all made available in a research guide. So see me after if you want that link, and everything that's showcased today, as well as everything that you'll hear from the panelists, will be available there. So without further ado, please let me introduce today's panelists. We have our moderator, Lux Darkbloom, Associate Librarian at Marriott Library. We have Armando Solorzano next to Lux, Associate Professor in Ethnic Studies, Family and Consumer Studies, and author of We Remember, We Celebrate, We Believe, Latinos in Utah, and other works on display over here. Next to Armando is Pamela Cappas-Toro, Operations Director for Higher Education in Prison in Undergraduate Studies, and also adjunct faculty for Spanish and World Languages and Culture. Did I get that right? Sorry. And next to Pamela is Ed Munoz, Associate Professor in Ethnic Studies and Curator of the Oral History Collection Construyendo Latinidad, Constructing Latinx Latinx Identity in the Intermountain West. And next to Ed is Romeo Garcia, Assistant Professor in Writing and Rhetoric Studies and editor of Unsettling Archival Research, Engaging Critical, Communal, and Digital Archives, also on display at the book table. So Lux has 3 or a few questions. We were really trying to decide how many questions to go with. And then we wanted this portion to go till about 12:15. And then there's a mic available here if you have questions and can engage in dialogue and conversation with the panelists. And if you would please use the mic so that then our online audience can hear. And then we figured that could go until about 12:30. And then we will conclude the speaking portion and then have time for food, and you can listen to music and browse the collections and talk further with the panelists and the moderator. So thank you again for being here. Lux, please take it away.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I'm especially excited to be part of this event as a proud Mexican-American librarian, our sole Latino librarian here in our library faculty. So let's begin. We titled this event, Utah Latinidad History, the State of Archival Research. What does the term Latinidad mean to you? And any of you can speak up in any order.
For me, it means kind of, what does it mean to be Latino, Latina, Chicano, Chicana, Puerto Riqueño? There's quite a few identities, so to speak. There's a wide diversity of identity within the Latina community, and it comes with its controversies as well. The term, even just the term Latinidad, provokes a lot of controversy because it's kind of an erasure of, well, not kind of, it has been an erasure of African roots of Latinidad and also of the indigenous roots. And you know, it's kind of been over the years, particularly probably since the 70s, 60s and 70s, where there's kind of been this attempt to homogenize the Latino community and into kind of this marketable, you know, entity. And so I'll stop there and give everybody else a chance to add and all that. And me, I claim to be a Nebrasqueño, which is a Chicano born and raised in Nebraska.
Yeah, I think that I will just piggyback a little bit, right? Like all the things, sorry, I apologize. Many alarms to let me know that things are happening in my life. I would like to go a couple of steps back because I'm coming from Puerto Rico, so the concept Latinidad was a little bit different, right? When you live in the island and when you come to the United States. So for us, right, like over there, Latinidad was a cultural connection, right, with other Latin American countries, right? Not too much of a necessarily political connection necessarily when I was living over there. But when I moved to the United States, right, like I started to grasp, right, like the concept of not being Puerto Riqueña any longer, but being Latina in the United States, right? So learning processes, you know, what does it mean to be Latino in this political framework of the United States, right? Thinking about our shared histories of enslavement in Latin America, right? Thinking about Spanish colonization, right? Those centuries of Spanish colonization and how those histories like connect us here in the United States. Also thinking about the geopolitical relationships that we have with this country, right? With the United States as well. So that vision start to amplify the land theft, right? And like Ed mentioned, all these contradictions, right? Because it's erasure of a lot of, you know, like indigenous, right? The concept Latin America, African components, right? So it's a label that it has a lot of contradictions, right? And yeah, like, and that's why I think that it brings a lot of rich conversations.
To me, Latinidad is just an academic effort to capture the complexity of 22 different nations brought together in one space, of people who claim binary and non-binary sexual orientations, of people who don't even claim to change the same culture. Is the attempt to understand local culture with transculturality. It's an effort to understand what cannot be understood in academia, but only in the real life of the people. Yes, my dad is a native indigenous Tlayacanque Indian. My mother is French. So imagine the combination. Born in Mexico, growing up in the United States, married to an Italian woman with children who claim to be Mexican Italians. And say, well, and where is the American part here? You were born in the United States. So again, what we are trying to do with the term Latinidad is like with another terms. I think the most positive part that I find in Latinidad is to fall in essentialisms. And I think you know what it is. That we reduce a person to one essential characteristics, and that's it. I mean, if you ask, well, and why are you black? Well, because you are black. Don't you see the color of the skin? Well, that black person might be a Latino or is a Latino. It's, again, because we used to ask these questions, right? What makes a Chicano to be a Chicano? What makes you to be a woman? That's essentialism. That's the reduction of the full complexity of a person who can be a professor, who can be a mother, who can be a nurse, who can be sharing the black inheritance, like in my case, because I grew up with a nanny who was an African Mexican descendant from the African slave who were running through the Underground Railroad and ended up in Mexico and ended up being our servants or maid servants, right? Well, I have to absorb her culture too because I grew under her mandil, right, under her nahuas. So again, it's an attempt to understand something that can be in a better perspective. It's a contradictory term. So when people ask me, well, how do you identify yourself? I am a member of the cosmic race. And again, that is the news coming from the Chicano movement later on. I feel more comfortable with that. Again, because the way I'm treated, not because what I am, because what people think that I am, or what people think that Latinos are. If I go to the reservation, I'm not Indian enough. That's what I have to make my hair grown up and see if I can be accepted as an indigenous, as an Indio, right? But if I go to France, I go and talk to people that I haven't talked for 400 years. If I go to Mexico, I'm not Mexican. But again, Latinidad is that. It's a very complex term, like any other terms. It's a social creation, and we can talk more about it. And again, in this process of social creation, everything changed. I mean, if you ask, what is the essence of Latinidad? And say, well, there are attributes that all of us share together. And then you ask the question to people who claim into this theory, and what are those attributes? Well, we don't know because we don't want to be essentialists. So again, I think it's an attempt to bring us to the essence of who we are as people, as human beings, with no differentiation of the color of the skin or of my nationality, but bringing you together at that human experience that connects everybody. And I'm going to talk here because there are so many beautiful interpretations that they are contributing with.
So, are you able to hear me? I actually cannot recall hearing the word Latino or Chicano until I reached higher education. So when I went to Texas A&M and College Station, it was my first time hearing the word Latino and Chicano. And it was from my professors, actually, who tried to teach me about the places that I am actually from, the border towns, borderlands. And it was an interesting yet controversial term. Interesting because I entered Texas A&M at a time where they were trying to advance diversity, at a time when the student population that is still very much conservative and white did not like the idea of diversity. And so for many of us who, for some reason, stayed in and near the dorms, Latino became a term that we used as a collective effort. You know, we whittled down from about 20 of us to about 10, but it was a way for us to connect to each other, to share similar experiences. And yet, Latinidad, or Latinos, was only ever a temporary point of departure for us, because once we got into the complexities of our everyday experiences, right, the particularities of our lives, that's where it got complicated. And that's where you see kind of the interworkings of anti-Blackness, for example, right? That's where you see the kind of darkness of anti-Indian, right? And even though we laugh within our own cultures about having family members who are very much part of the indigenous roots, and laugh meaning like we have certain nicknames that we give and within our family, but you come to learn that it has certain connotations to it as well, right? So that careful reckoning that's waiting for all of us for me, did not come until I actually reached higher education. And so that's why I say it's an interesting yet very controversial, complex term, because I can see the benefit of the need for Latinidad. At the same time, I cannot separate it from the idea of Latin America that emerges in the 16th century, right? I cannot separate it from the rise of a modern subjectivity that we would know as mestizo or mestizaje, right? And you cannot separate it either from, and you just talked about it a little while ago, this kind of harmonious, authentic cultural identity that always already comes at the exclusion of some, right?
Thank you. So continuing on, about the state of archival research, what does it mean to build and use an archive, or to use an existing archive to address harm, settler colonial histories, and lived experiences? Or to put it another way, how can we use the concepts of settler colonialism, coloniality, and decoloniality to analyze the experiences of Latinos in Utah?
Okay.
Okay, so most of my research at the moment focuses on church settler discourse and settler discourse, right? Settler discourse broadly conceived, meaning settlers that arrived in Texas or in Washington, which is kind of the next space that I'm working in. Church settlers literally referring to church settlers of Utah, right? And within Utah, I work, say, for example, with the Journal Discourses, which is about a 26-volume journal, 300 pages a piece, a journal, which is pretty big. It took me years to get through. But it was a fascinating journal in that what I learned was these people are very good at archiving, right? Very good at documenting certain events that are occurring in how they perceive it, right? And I started to think about, what can we learn from it in terms of settler colonialism, for example? And what I see from Texas, Utah, Washington is this kind of interconnected system of ideas. The ideas that land is waiting to be discovered, that land can be transformed into resources, so property, basically, and that certain people have divine and natural rights to it, right? On the other hand, I found it very useful in that if we encourage students to archive their own lives, their own stories so far, you can see the ways that their everyday lives adhere to those settler archives and what they represent. And it provides a very fascinating and yet haunting opportunity for students to come to terms with kind of their own trajectories of their lives and what they hope and what we can hope together in terms of worlding projects of futures that look different than what it does at the moment.
Well, for myself, I've had a chance to work with different archives, I guess. For me, I started the Construyendo Latinidad archive that's here in the library. It kind of started out of a project in Wyoming, a museum project that I revised with the help of the Wyoming Department of History and the Wyoming Archives. And that's when I became aware of La Cultura Oral History Project. And when I came to Utah, then I became aware of the Spanish-speaking peoples of Utah Oral History Archive. And so I started and I was really interested in kind of creating this, what does Latinidad mean, kind of what we're talking about and those types of things. And I wanted students to kind of be able to get in there and explore these different oral histories. And so I devised a community engaged learning project doing oral histories. And I would train students to do oral histories, but then at the same time, they would go into the La Cultura project was done in the 1980s, and the Spanish-speaking peoples of Utah was done in the 1970s. So it was a way for them kind of like to see the trajectory of their communities, so to speak, and to see that folks even back then were experiencing the same types of discriminatory policies, those types of things that they're feeling today, experiencing and going through today. But it also kind of gives them this empowerment as well, because those folks were also, you saw people talking about the Chicano movement, that you saw people talking about, how, they would use the legal system in order to kind of help them overcome different things and the different strategies that they would use in order to overcome oppressive kinds of living conditions as well. And so, and now this, I've been able to kind of create this Construyendo Latinidad, and it's great because I've been working with folks from the Genealogical Society for Hispanic America, and I like working with that group because I'm usually the youngest person in the room when I'm working with them, as opposed to on campus, I'm usually the oldest person in the room, and so I get to see these contrasts, and one of the things that really comes out of that as well is after you do these interviews and all that, people express this real gratitude toward, for capturing their stories and making them feel like somebody does want to know their history, because we're still seeing that, the erasure of these histories over the years. Colonization has done that. I remember even growing up myself, always wondering, why didn't we study about Pancho Villa or the Mexican Civil War and in history classes? Why was it always this and that or whatever? And so you kind of develop this sense of inferiority growing up. That's our educational system kind of does that. It has this kind of simultaneous effect of creating superiority and inferiority at the same time because of this Eurocentric curriculum, so to speak. And this is a way to kind of push back on that, and students get a chance to see how they can, make connections and things like that. So, and I've been able to, it's great working with those folks as well, with the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America. We have monthly meetings, and then they put me in touch with the Utah Historical Society, and they were able to fund some more research. And so there's, I was able to do 15 oral histories this past summer, and the Construyendo Latinidad database archive has about 15 oral histories, but that was done over the course of 2 years without funding, but with students and myself and those types of things. So it's a nice contrast, and the people of Utah's revisited oral history database, I've been able to kind of look at, we were able to recruit a lot more diverse group of people, Puerto Ricanos, and because the Genealogical Society of Hispanic American, largely New Mexican Latinos and this and that or whatever. So it's been a way to broaden kind of the Utah Latinidad experience as well. So I'll kind of stop there, whatever.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yes, okay, great. So I will talk a little bit about a slight different context, right? Thinking about using an archive, but within a prison system or carceral context. So previously to coming to Utah, we had a higher education in prison program in a prison in Florida. So one of the classes was a history course, and we're talking about like Indian removal in Florida and slavery, and how a national state park, when you go over there, there's a plaque that says the name of the people enslaved here were forgotten. And students were, they were like, what did they try to mean when they say that the histories of the people here were, the names of the people that were here were forgotten, right? So in the class that was being taught by by a professor that back then, students really that stood out to them, right? That the names of the people that were enslaved in that plantation, they were erased, forgotten. They were taking a history course, and they asked the professor, "What are we going to do about this? We don't believe that the names of the people that once were here enslaved were forgotten. Like, what's going on, right?" The professor embarked in the endeavor to go to the archives, making a lot of copies, right? Then bringing them to the prison. But a lot of these documents happened to be in Spanish. We had Latinx students right in the project that they were Spanish speakers and English speakers. They were bilingual. So what it means to use, right, like an archive in a carceral context, well, it's super complicated, right? Because it's making photocopies of these, archives, bringing inside of the prison, translating them, but also thinking about how to piece this archive together in narratives, right, that will start to make sense, and hopefully to see if, these names of the people that were enslaved over there were recovered. Well, long story short, the students were able to recover 200 names of people that were enslaved in that plantation. But they wanted to do something else, right? Because the information that was displayed on that park was incomplete, right? There was a lot of gaps. This was a very long process. It took like almost the research project and everything, right? It took almost like 3 or 4 years to put together. But they came up with a traveling exhibit, right? In which the 200 names that were recovered were, put as part of the exhibit. But they were able to trace very fascinating stories, like even tracing the history of one man that was a direct descendant of people that were enslaved in that plantation. And the students were one of the students was able to trace, right, like, and to compile a lot of documents, but also like trying to make sense, right? Because the archive when you go to an archive, it will not give you the history as you see maybe in history books, right? Like sometimes a researcher could go into something in mind, but you find so many things, right? That your job is trying to put all these pieces together in order to articulate, right? Like like histories, right? Or to try to make sense of this. So just try to think about how to address harm, right? It's like the erasure that happens often in our countries, right? Like this erasure. But I think that what does it mean to build that archive? Also, a lot of the students were thinking about their own situation as incarcerated people, right? What it means to be incarcerated and being archived by the state as a criminal, right? Because that's how the state will archive you as a criminal, that you did X, Y, and Z. And they use that as a way to reflect about their own self, right? The importance of being incarcerated, and also being a researcher, being a writer, to try to bring other things into the histories, right? So, so I will stop right there, but thinking about the importance of, like a lot of, in that case, right, collective work, and language, right? Like, so it was a collective effort to put that in, how to learn how to use an archive, right? But also how the students saw the importance of that historical moment, but also in their histories, right? So I will stop over there.
Yeah, I really like this question because, again, it reflects the challenge that we do have as Latinx people to write history. It is not that we don't have history. What we need is people who write it. And in order to write it, we need archives. And I said that because when I came here to teach, that was, 30-something. Don't talk about age. Don't talk about age.
Sorry.
There were two things going on. The Presidential Commission on Civil Rights asked the state of Utah to send a report about the minorities in the Beehive State. The response was, we don't have anything to report because we don't have minorities. So, to me, produced what is called cognitive dissonance, because growing up in Mexico, by the age of 4, I already know that Utah was part of Mexico as part of this nationalistic education. But then coming to Utah, no, there is no history. I said, wow. So I came here because, again, in my 3rd year in ethnic studies of my RPT, retention, I was advised to do history on local minorities. And I took the challenge without knowing that there was nothing to work with. So and that was my first question. Okay, you want me to do and get tenure based on local minorities. So I came here to, I don't think a special collection was still in place. And I know there are people here from the special collection who have the history. But what happened is that they told me, oh yeah, in 1970, you just referred to that, Ed, the Rockefeller Foundation gave money to the American West Center, talking about history here, and to do interviews with minorities. Unfortunately, under the direction, and again, here some people know of Gregory Thompson, O'Neill, Floyd O'Neill, Ed Meyer, and Vincent Meyer, who was at that time an ambassador in Cuba. So we had everything going. So I went, and they say, oh yeah, we took these interviews, but that's it, nobody had used them. To me, there were 192 interviews. And I talked to Thompson and said, well, there's no money for this. So with my wife and my kids, we got and brought a scanner and asked permission to Greg Thompson to scan so we can produce electronic files. That took us 2 summers. We got it up there. And then, okay, I want to go and start reading the contributions of all Latinos. Again, I'm not going to continue on that, but because then in 1980, the Oral History Institute, that it was directed and still directed by Kellen, did a second up of trying to follow up the second generations of the people who were interviewed. And again, if you haven't seen that, it's amazing. We have, for instance, the grandparents of Ruby Chacon. We have the whole Bill Gonzalez. Beautiful stories. And I think Ed wrote a wonderful article on reclaiming the presence of New Mexicans in Latinidad, correct? That was beautiful done.
No, thank you.
So after that, I want to say that I jumped into the 1980s, but then it stopped there. So I did my own in 2000. I was planning to do 150, trying to capture the experience of the 3rd generation. Yes, I only did 72 who are coming to special collections. It was financed, but again, a lot of organizations in Utah. But I ran out of money, and I think you know how expensive is the transcription is. So yeah, they are coming. So then later on, and we steal the files, nobody can analyze them, of Socio. Socio was the Spanish-speaking organization for community integrity and opportunity. It was the group who carried the civil rights movements in Utah. There are 145 boxes untouched. Nobody. And again, who is going to write it, right? We need you. We need people. And for all of you who are, we try hard, right? Like in our classes. Okay, let's go and look at the files of Socio. But again, they can, how much can they look? Probably $1, $2 in one semester, and I started to write in. Then there are files here of the Kennecott mining company. And I did that because I need to learn the experience of the miners in Utah, right? Because again, finding that 65% of the people in Brigham were Mexicans and Hispanic. And you are telling me there is no history? But you need to run into a lot of research situations. Because again, there was not a category for Mexicans in the census in Utah. Because we were subsumed. Wait, what am I talking? I'm talking too much. I'm going to cut it there. So again, my whole research changed when I was doing the interview in 2000 in the town of Monticello, southeastern. I went and interviewed a viejita. And I asked the question, can you tell me about your history? And said, I don't have a history, I only have pictures. Oh. And say, can I see one? And, oh yeah, I destroyed it. And she put it together with the Scotch tape. I said, oh, good. Well, what happened is that this viejita was reconstructing the history to photos. So, and I said that because it opened a new methodology for me. In fact, if you look at the book, and this is no propaganda, but it is, it's full of pictures. Why? 3 reasons. Why? If you tell our history to the people of Utah, they don't believe it. You think they are making it up. But when you show a picture, it's like evidence. It's this, oh, really? Did you use Photoshop? Come on, guys, we don't even have cameras at that time. What are you thinking about? So I said that because, again, you mentioned, I take that picture, and then it occurred to me to do a travel exhibit, and I did it at the Capitol. And the people start sending me pictures. And then I found that the University of Utah, there is photo collections on the Latinos and Hispanic, but they haven't opened up yet. And we want you to open. For instance, I will mention the collection that you have of George Honachek. You have seen my travel exhibit. There is a beautiful picture of a migrant worker in Ogden, a little child showing his belly and 2 onions, beautiful. But all that is in the collection of George Honachek. And I say that because photography at this point, in our experience, are epistemological tools to recreate the history. And it's beautiful. Again, I can talk about this, but they didn't pay me much, so I'm going to cut it pretty soon. I'm just kidding, you know that. What I'm saying here is that, probably I'm jumping a little bit over, but we need to create new ways of doing work. Because again, when I bring these pictures to the community, you need to teach them what is called photo literacy. You need to show how to read a picture. And it's beautiful. I mean, in the book, again, and I learned this when I was doing the exhibit, that in the background, they put the American flag, giving the message to the Italians and to the Greek who work in the mines, hey, we are not strikers like you guys, we are really American. Why these people who are not even Americans because they are Mexican nationals working in the mines, as replacement of the strikebreakers, I say, read that. So we'll use photo literacy. Again, there is too much to talk on this, but I think we have to use what is there and make the most of it. And you can do that with creative methodologies. And we call that in the next studies and in other areas, decolonizing the sources or decolonizing the minds. So you can bring new categories of analysis. Things that, and I'll just give you an example. When I did exhibit at the Capitol, of the pictures in that book, people start bringing flowers to the picture. Oh, that's my grandpa. And we don't have a picture, and start bringing flowers. And then the director of the floor said, you need to withdraw those flowers. I said, no, sir, you do it. Right? No, it does say, it does. But again, people start claiming their own identity with non-traditional ways of doing academia. And I stop there again because I get too excited and I haven't had lunch yet.
Well, I'm going to continue with a little bit of propaganda. Armando's exhibit is at has an exhibit at Mestizo running right now. So get down there, and they have good coffee there, I guess, as well. I don't drink coffee, but
Oh,
yeah.
brother.
But yeah, it's there. It's beautiful.
We are open new lines. Oh, again, there are going to be another exhibit talking about propaganda. And that in 2 weeks, right, Alison? That's right. And it's going to be on the Day of the Dead. It's called Made in Utah. Okay, but I'm just stop. What I want to say is that we are open new lines of research. Like, for instance, based on those interviews in the past, we are looking, there is a group of 10 Native American researchers looking at the notion of Lamanites. You know what that is, with all respect. We are looking at what does that mean? And I thought about your work again. And no, we didn't agree to support each other, okay? No, believe me, this is very independent. But I'm glad you put us together, and thank you. Thank you for doing that. What we're doing is how the concept of the Lamanite was constructed among us, right? At the beginning, we came here, oh, you're a Lamanite, and you know what it is. And if not, you pay $600 to take my class. But what it is, right? So we found, we are digging into that. And of course, you are going to find challenge, right? From what you call mainstream academia. But we respect that, right? We approach all these issues. We are also doing the history of Chicanas. Because we have been accused, and probably Ed, you might carry the burden too, that our research is too masculine. That there are so many Chicanas in this state. And I completely agree. And especially if you look at right now, I mean, how many women we have represented. Again, I said 5 minutes ago I was going to stop.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much, everyone. On a related note, what are some of the most significant ways that we can use archival research to promote social justice for Latinos in Utah?
I'll go.
Okay.
So when I came to archival research, it was during my dissertation at Syracuse. And I went down to University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which is where I'm from. And I sat in on multiple classes and interviewed a good amount of students, I think about 35, 40, which was good enough for me at that point. And what they all had in common was this kind of need, this demand for learning their history. That in high school, middle school, and even in college, they learned about everybody else's history except for their own. And I took that seriously. So I found myself at the Special Collections and Archives of UTRGV, going through 20, 30 boxes of just random materials, what seemed to be random at the moment, actually. And that is where my interest and love for archival research began. And my understanding of the role archival research can have in the classroom and for students. When I came to Utah, we had racist flyers circulating around campus. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to begin my class by discussing that and having that reckoning with it, with students. And it almost sounds cliche, but the students were like, well, that doesn't happen here. And, you know, it's somebody else, and it's not us, and blah, 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 you know, and which is fine. But it also reminded me of the importance of you can't just talk and teach about theory, right? I had this idea that, I'm going to then respond by talking about decolonial work. But decolonial work is only as good as if it addresses the particularities and specificities in which power unfolds in a particular space and place. That's how I found myself in the archives here in Utah. And because of some students who were former members of the church who actually gifted me books to read and various resources to acquaint myself with. I'm not an expert on church history or anything like that. But as someone trained in rhetorical work, I know how to read, and I know how to look closely and unsettle ideas. And just as you were stating earlier, you have to teach students how to read images. And it's a very fun way to come to terms with how an image speaks, right? It creates a sound, and we become part of that spectacle of creating sounds that surround kind of the nature, the culture, the environment of Utah. To be honest, you just drive down Temple Square and you know what I mean, right? It's an entire block of culture there, right? That's communicating a particular message to you. Whether or not you like it, it's there and it's communicating to you. And, you know, I just want to underscore really quickly the importance of just where you're at. I was in Long Beach, Washington, visiting a friend, and the first sign that I encounter in crossing the bridge was, this is Chinook land, right? And it hasn't been ceded, right? That's what sparked my interest in archival research in Washington, right? And so for me, archival research has always been in response to the demand for something else and where I am at, right? And for me, archival research lends itself to complicating dominant narratives of Utah history. You know, for example, the idea of Utah as a destined place and a gathering space, right? You can complicate that really quickly by just sending students to This Is the Place Heritage Park and reading the monuments, right? I mean, the narrative is as settler colonial as you can get. And yet, students, and you can't blame them, all they know and all they have learned is that history. And they are supported by that history. So our role, I feel, as educators is not to place blame, is not to belittle anybody. It's to come to terms and unsettle ideas that have been long settled.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with Romeo. I think doing archival research or oral histories is kind of an act of social justice. Bringing other histories or competing histories, and to see where, you can find kind of the similarities and things like that, and how people could build coalitions. Because sometimes we have this, there's Mormon and non-Mormon, but oftentimes there was coalitions to help people, with number of issues and whatnot. I think even like socio, I think would get a lot of help from the LDS Church, with funding and things like that. And you see these kinds of coalitions that were in the past, and it's not just this kind of strict kind of Mormon versus non-Mormon kind of thing as well. You see intermarriages between Mormon and non-Mormon, those types of things as well, and how do people navigate those identities and whatnot, and people that leave the Mormon faith as well, and for whatever reason. And so you see all these kinds of complexities of not only within your own community, but your other community, and you find ways to build coalitions and kind of come to terms with those complicated histories, and see where you can build things together. So.
Yeah, I think that thinking about student university newspapers has a lot of value, right? Because when you think about, I was in a recent conversation about Latinx students, putting up front some concerns, right, and things like that. And it's very fascinating to go and revisit student newspapers of, a couple of years ago, right? Because that truly brings the connections between what was happening in the university back then to the demands that students may have in the present, but they're also interconnected to larger social justice issues, right? And I will say for student organizations, right, that are interested on present demands, there's a lot of value on revisiting those newspapers because it provides for a lot of them an aha moment that yes, like students were organizing around similar issues, and I think that it brings them that spark that sometimes you might think of your university as a non-activist campus, right, and things like that, but reading that students, 20, 30 years ago were organizing around certain issues, I think that it's an important thing for students to also see themselves represented in those newspapers, right? So I will say not only as we can think of, that thinking about local newspapers of new students producing history, right, and that being a very rich archive of maybe changing the trajectory of higher education institutions, right? I think that they're powerful tools to understand what was happening, how these histories are interconnected, and where the university could move forward, right? When we think about social justice issues, and I will stop right there.
I'll try to be short. I try. For me, the best use of the archives is to create new archives. And I just follow up with what Pamela was saying. The use of the students' newspaper. During the late 80s and 90s, on campus, we have a newspaper called Venceremos. And it was written by Mecha students. Some of them, as individuals, have the papers. I would love to see the University of Utah Memorial Library to make the attempt to call and create that student, because it's a new source of analysis, the way they were thinking, especially on issues of immigration, integration in the University of Utah. They raised amazing questions, right? But I think is that creation of new, Ed, you mentioned about this new collection of Latinidad. I didn't know it exists. I think it will be marvelous if we connect that project with the 3 sets of oral interviews, right? And then connect, and again, I'm thinking big, right? Because I dream in the American dream. Why not to connect what we have with BYU? BYU has done amazing set of interviews with, yes, I know, with Hispanic Latinos, LDS. We talk about Latinidad. Everybody has a place in this table. The issue is inclusion. Bring us together. Or like my mom said, here comes your brother, we never invited, just put more water in the beans and we're good. That's what it is. Connect with BYU. Connect with Utah Historical Society. And you said they have a wonderful set of photos. And so to me, that is the best way. And then with what you said, open up. Let's talk about issues that they don't want us to talk. And that is religion. Why not? What is wrong with religion? It's something that has identified Hispanic and Latinos, Mexican and Mexican Americans, whatever you want to call them, or call us, is that we are spiritual people. And that is forgotten. We come from very deep indigenous societies based on spirituality. And that is like suffocated because we cannot talk about religion. And all religion, again, is a bridge to talk about and bring everybody together. So again, all these collections of set of interviews and photograph collections, it will be good. Yeah, and I feel inspired because when I do my work, when in the past, I came to the special collections of the Maryland Library, and I see great Utah historian like Leonard Harrington. You heard that, right? He was working there, taking risk. Like he wrote a book about the creation of the Mormon Empire. That opened up my eyes. But seeing, working there with me on the side, unable to talk. And then we have recently, I think his name is Paul Reeves, a religion, he wrote a book called A Religion of Different Color. That opened the door for us, right? But we need to talk and tell the LDS people, listen, now 52% of all Latinos in the world are Latinx. Can we talk about it? And that's what the archives give us. The ability to collect information and have a very strong ground from which to talk. But if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it.
Well, that sounds great. Let's turn time over to the audience. And there's a mic right here for anybody who's had a question.
Grab my water. Oops.
Hey. Do all of you have any current projects you're working on that you'd like to shout out or like that you'd want more eyes on?
Well, I mentioned the Construyendo Latinidad. It started with kind of my desire to kind of learn more about Utah history as well as more about the Intermountain West. I mentioned I was from Nebraska, but I'm from Western Nebraska, and so everybody thought I was well, I even thought I was a Midwesterner, but then I was at Wyoming for 10 years, and then I've been here 10 years, and Western Nebraska, I think, is the Intermountain West. So, but I wanted to kind of learn more about that, and so, but I wasn't able to kind of put together much of a funding, and I was an administrator for too long, and so my research was kind of stalling out, and that's why I started to kind of develop a project with the help of students as well. And students love it. And I am using the Spanish-speaking peoples of Utah database as well as the one in Wyoming, and students compare. They analyze an interview from each one of those archives, and then they compare it, and then they do an interview themselves. And so they're able to kind of draw these parallels and all that. I still haven't been able to kind of write anything significant. I'm starting to now. You get to the point where okay, I've done enough here. I need to start writing. And I'm working with the Utah Historical Society on their overall project with the peoples of Utah revisited. And they have a great, they put together these scan and share events to take documents of photos and documents of, I think I even have a document in there now of a letter my niece wrote to me during the pandemic, and something that she wanted to, to kind of help her get through the pandemic, and a beautiful letter. Now when I look at it, it makes me emotional and talks to me about, I really admire you because you have you're doing so much with the Hispanic community because of your faith and this and that, and it kind of makes me emotional. But those are the kinds of things that you like to see, what was going on in particular times, but they're also collecting not only Latino oral histories, but histories from all different racial ethnic groups, and it's kind of ongoing right now. So I'm going to have 15 interviews in that archive as well. So I've been able to do about 30 interviews over the course of about two or 3 years now. Some of the help of students and whatnot. It does help to have some funding to hire folks to help you transcribe. There are transcribing software now that help out tremendously, but it's not perfect. So you need people to help you edit, and that's why I was able to do 15 interviews in one summer versus 15 interviews over the course of 3 years, you know, those types of things as well. But yeah, there's this need to connect them all, like Armando was saying. And I think that'll happen sooner or later. I'm hoping to even be able to look at oral history archives from different states within the Intermountain West as well, because that's a kind of history, a Latinx history that isn't really talked about. It's not this kind of destination point, Latino destination point, as some of us sociologists like to, kind of describe, it's, people don't know about us and things like that. So it's good to kind of bring that history out in addition to like the more common Latino destination points in the Southwest, Northeast, and South Florida, things like that. So, video.
Yeah, again, I like to dream. Doesn't cost me anything. But for 15 years, we have been pushing the idea at the University of Utah of creating a research center for racialized minorities in the Intermountain. Is Ed ideas too, right? Not only our Latinx people in Utah, but Montana, the whole Intermountain. Because we are very different from other Latinos in the Southwest, to the point that when we do presentations in national conference, they don't understand what we're talking about, right? They go, what are you talking about, Zion and not Aztlán? Well, because that's the prevalent ideology. Same place, right?
It's the same place.
That's what the god and goddesses of the Aztec people say. This is Aztlán, this is the place. And we heard the same voice 2,000 years later, but with more power. But that's okay. So that's one project. Again, we love to see a research center on racialized minorities for the Intermountain region. And not only for Latinx people. There is a long history of African American, the issues of slavery, which, by the way, I think somebody's doing a presentation on that. There are dissertations there written by John Coleman, who was one of the co-founders of ethnic studies. His dissertation is to come out and be integrated. So again, a research center will help us. Personally, I'm doing this project on the Lamanites. It's very costly, mainly because, and that's one of the issues that all students understand. I'm going to say it. The university wants us to produce master students and PhD students in 2 years. To do this kind of work, it takes several years. Just read one interview. I mean, like, I did an interview with Andrew Gallegos. It was 21 hours of interview. There are 600 pages. Imagine one student doing content analysis. And I do in my class. Yeah, I used to do in the Chicano. One of the final projects, come and look at socio. And they say, where do I start? Well, I start with box 1. Where do I finish? Half of the document of box 1. But then I did nothing. But little by little, we can start. If some of you are interested in socio, I mean, we need to write a history of the Chicano civil rights, or the Mormon Chicanos, as they say these days. That is that project, the project of Chicanas. Again, Ed, I don't know your project in detail, but I would like to see more interviews with Latinas. But that has, and I'm interested in doing that, but we run into the issues of financial support. It's again, they think, again, it's, but it is. I didn't say the word, that we are productive. the University of Utah has this dream of naming this university as a Hispanic-friendly institution.
HSI, Hispanic Serving Institute.
If they want to do that, we need the archive, the sources, the professors, the projects, right? And of course, I hear my students want engage into projects. Like, again, now with COVID. Yes, we got the numbers that 54% of the COVID cases in Utah were for Latinos when we are only 16% of the population. Why is that? They want answers. How are we going to be providing answers in the classroom? By doing the work. Those are the projects that we want to engage in. And I'm sorry again.
Any other questions?
I work in, can you hear me?
A little bit.
Okay, I'm either too quiet or too loud from asking my toddler to get dressed. So I'm an archivist. I work in special collections, both with putting stuff online and also acquiring born digital materials. And I think that one of the challenges in working with students and younger researchers is that they think of archives as like things that they can touch and they can feel, and it's old things and things that feel fragile. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is how do you talk to your students about what is archival material, and how, like when they're thinking about the material they create, even whether it's individuals or student clubs or organizations and community engaged projects, how do you sort of educate them about what's the new nature of archival materials?
Well, that's interesting for me because most of what I do is it's all digitized. A lot of it is, now it's becoming more and more digitized. I can give the link to Armando after this. I'll give you the link and you can see it's a public archive, so you can start researching if you want. That's what the purpose is for these archives. And so I don't know how to answer your question. I do bring, you can come and talk to my class, okay, to talk about those issues, because those are some of the things that I haven't really thought through. It's mainly been the training them to do oral histories, and now we've been doing the oral histories through Zoom as well, which is, and we didn't, when the first interview that we did do in my class, I borrowed a digital audio recorder from the Marriott Library, and we went up to a room in Gardner Commons because our narrator wanted to come up to campus, and he's an alum and we sat there, and then 2 weeks later, COVID hit, and right then we started going to Zoom, and that has kind of been, there's advantages and disadvantages to it, but we've done pretty much everything online. And so I don't know how to answer that. I haven't done some of the kind of archival research that folks are talking about here. And even that, like the People of Utah Revisited project, their scan and share events, I can give you the website to that as well, and people can look at pictures right online anymore too. So. Yeah, but I'm sure others can probably talk about that. But I do know, I think we just had an event sponsored through Ethnic Studies, the Phyllis Wheatley event, and people were instructed, well, you can go up and see the book and everything, and I'm sure that there were people there saying that you cannot touch it, probably. That's what I imagine, and and I didn't have the chance to go there, but yeah, those are the kinds of things that I've never really. You could touch it, okay. But that's something else as well. It's amazing. I think our new faculty member said it's amazing. She was surprised that we had a copy of Phyllis Wheatley's book, and so we don't even know, even though we kind of want more from the University of Utah, sometimes we don't even know what the University of Utah has as well. And why we need to kind of talk about these other archives as well, like the Spanish-speaking peoples of Utah, you know, archive and all that. So, but I don't know, I'll let some of my fellow panelists talk about that as well.
Yeah, I could think of I mean, it's not exactly right, but if students are analyzing like material culture, just having pictures of material culture and then archived, right, instead of having your, you cannot bring the bottles of water, right, the tazas or whatever it is, but if you take, if you're doing that analysis, I'm thinking about, there's an exhibit of pictures of inside of homes of people, a lot of pictures of that, right? So taking pictures of the material culture that you cannot bring with you because there's no space, right? That might be one way to, you know, to engage with that, right? But I don't know if there's other ideas. I know that, you know, in the prison we were doing like an exhibit, but in order to bring, you know, students did their portraits, right? They were having an art class. And what we did was to take a lot of pictures of the, you know, of the art that they produce. You know, it's a website. They curated a playlist because they wanted a playlist along with the, you know, with the music. So yeah, I will say like a lot of the things have to be digitized, right? Taking pictures or like producing things, yeah, that could be put in the internet, and then students, and then people can use that, right, as potential ways to engage with the developing research. I don't know.
No, I think you are addressing a institutional problem, institutional dilemma, because all the students want to see results. They want to Google it and write a 10-page paper. That's not possible. We are, in my class, again, I fight with the students that they have to buy a book. Because to me, a book, a physical document, is already a statement of different type of education. And the same happens when my students go to look at the interviews. Well, there's too much in there. Well, that's life, that's education. You don't need to pay $2,000 for a class to Google an answer. But again, it's institutional. And there are some issues that can be improved, like when my students come and see the boxes of socio, they complain that, well, the person at the desk only gives me one document at a time. And it takes a long time to ask for the next document. But they need to understand that these are historical documents that are preserved as a manifestation of the life of our ancestors and our institutions. I even go farther and say, that document is sacred. An oral interview for me is the trust of the people to put their lives on my hands. And it should be. But you see that it's institutional. Is to change the whole mentality of what research is and what it's for. And then you have to be patient. That book, again, here, my commercial, the one that you see on mine, it took me 15 years. And for what? They say, well, at least it's a book, it's a statement. The Latinos write books, don't we? But again, is the I think you point out to, and again, probably goes into the whole, I read a report from the Mario Library that the number of people who come and consult books has diminished from 2,000 to significant number. Again, we need to do something, right? And if they come to an archive, they look at your history, right? It's like when they say Native Americans, oh, I see a pipe exhibited on the windows. And they think it's an historical artifact. It is not. It's real life for me. But again, you need to make that connection. So again, sometimes it can be the dynamics of the special collection, sometimes, and again, other times it might be the whole education in our classroom, right? I mean, and how do you do? How to treat it? Well, you have to treat that document even with gloves, because there are going to be 100 people after you who wants to see that document. And they need to be preserved. But that is the nature, again, of creating what we call the communal memory of the group. But again, I wish I can have an answer, but it is fighting against expectations of present educational systems and the value of research, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. But on the other hand, having the electronic files is a big help. I mean, I go just, and instead of looking at the 133 interviews of the Spanish history interview, I say go and look at the biography of Bill Gonzalez or Archer Chuleta, just one. Oh, but this person. Now, look another one and link them. Stories create history. But again, it's the word that is behind, I think, more than the physicality of the documents. Yeah.
Well, join me in thanking the panelists. This was such a great conversation. And thank you.
I'd like to thank all of the librarians that help us with our work. I seen Rebecca. Rebecca is one of the first people I contacted to help me out, help me navigate the Spanish-speaking Peoples of Utah archive. And Allison's come to my class as well. And so thank you all, and for all your hard work as well.
And I'm going to interject here, but no.
Yeah, but Robert, please ask, yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
To what extent do you believe that language or lack of knowledge of language is essential for the concept of Latinidad or for doing the archival research? I mean, and to what extent is the Latino Chicano community different from other ethnic groups in the U.S.? Italian Americans who don't speak Italian, or German Americans who don't speak German, or Polish Americans who don't speak Polish, et cetera. So is knowledge of Spanish or a Central or South American indigenous language essential to the concept of Latinidad?
Well, I don't think it's essential, but because there's a wide variety in terms of language ability within the Latino community, and it varies within a lifetime. I grew up early on speaking nothing but Spanish, and then as soon as my older sister started going to kindergarten, learning English, we all started speaking English in our household, and my parents decided to speak English with us and pretty much let Spanish go. And I think it's because of their experience with punishment when they were going through school. And I relearned Spanish after I graduated from high school and after I quit college and started working as a railroader and things like that, and working with guys from Mexico, and then going to the bars and singing songs in Spanish, and so I kind of relearned it as well. And it's kind of restricted kind of some of the things I do in the classroom, and getting to this kind of technological thing as well, because right now the software that I use to help transcribe doesn't do it in Spanish. So I have students interview people in English, and so it's limited some of those things that I can do with that. But But we do also have interviews that have been done in Spanish as well. And so, but I think it's important as well to kind of build on, because that's another a knowledge base as well. So, but there's, and that's the thing, and language even has this, within the Latino community, is kind of a divisive thing as well. If you don't speak Spanish good enough, you're not Latino enough, or whatever, those types of things. And so it's kind of this controversial kind of aspect as well. I wished it wasn't like that, but I think a lot of that also comes from the way, languages are taught in school. They try to, like my parents would say, and a lot of people could attest to this, they used to beat the language out of us. And even within indigenous communities, they beat the language out of us. And even today, it's a little bit more tolerant, but still, And back when I was going into school, they didn't encourage you to do Spanish. They encouraged you to do French or German, and not Spanish. And now it's kind of going the other way because of the racial ethnic demographics, so to speak. Okay.